Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, April 7th, 2022. Still 2022. All right. Well, that'll last for a little while longer. Glad we have that taken care of. And, rounding up the news today, gosh, as usual, a lot. I see Greg's raft of stories floating down the river and making their way here. We have much to cover, of course. And we missed having him here yesterday, but his triumphant return, which gives us a little bit of breathing room. That's nice, too. Out of breath from doing the show all by myself. I had the Friday experience on Wednesday. So today, forget about it. It's a Thursday that feels like a Saturday, which is kind of unusual. But, it doesn't really feel like Saturday. I'm up and doing the show. All right, lots to cover, as I said. Plenty going on yesterday, plenty going on later today. Bill reminds us all the way from Portland, Maine, that today's the day. And it's all here in his morning tweet, which reads that the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. This is true so far. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson will likely be confirmed to the Supreme Court today. I think it's a lock, but, actually a lot of people have COVID, so who knows. And supposed to be up for the vote today. Looks like they have the votes to do it. And first thing Kagro X, that's me, plans to do is have her expunge his parking tickets. Good luck with that. And I can do it all the way from the Supreme Court. There's no review of what they decide. You just have to get 5 justices to go along with it. And they all love me, and they don't want me to pay parking tickets. A parking ticket is something I haven't gotten in quite a while, of course, because you're not allowed to go anywhere. You can. You're not locked down. The truckers are wrong about that. They drove all over the place. In fact, they drove away finally. And I got to tell you something. News from the personal front is now that the trucker convoy is gone, Beltway traffic is a mess and it's blocked and no one can get around the Beltway. All they had to do was wait. They didn't have to do any of the driving. They spent all that money on diesel fuel and who knows what else. And now Beltway traffic is at a standstill for the second day in a row. I think it's just actually some construction is blocking some lanes in a certain, it's not the whole Beltway is shut down or anything, but seems pretty bad. And yesterday was a nightmare commute and not so great today either. And no trucks from the convoy in sight. So what a big waste. All they really had to do was they should have put some orange vests on and started working on the place. Do some infrastructure week. And as you know, of course, it makes a lot of sense, right? They came here to create a traffic jam, and they couldn't do it. Then they left, so we started some construction, which is, of course, almost always aimed at relieving traffic jams. And what's happened? Terrible traffic jam. Of course, it's not magic. You can't just you don't start construction and end traffic jams. You start construction and wait 6 years and then jam the new lane that they built and then say, we need 19 lanes here. It's kind of the way it goes with that sort of stuff. All right, plenty to distract with other news here. I've got a news notice already here. Mighty OCD has sent something along. What do we got here? From the Tennessee Lookout. Back to Tennessee. Wow. We spent almost all day on Tennessee perverts yesterday, though we did, tour the country and we dropped in on some Florida and Illinois perverts as well. Tennessee, what now? The Tennessee Lookout tweets since senior reporter Sam Stockard, who tweets as Stockard_Sam, I guess, has the latest on a controversial bill. Oh, good, finally, that would create a new form of marriage in Tennessee, one which would allow child marriages. That's called, I believe the new form of marriage is called statutory rape, but free statutory rape, and you get to get away with it. I was wondering what they might have done about that. I tweeted, this is a response, right? So I tweeted yesterday, just wondering, after all day, 2 days now of terrible publicity for Tennessee, I don't know who's in charge of that, they're trying to legalize child marriage in Tennessee. And you would think that the Republicans of Tennessee, although remember, notoriously, the Tennessee Republican Party, as I recall, had a terrible problem with their Twitter accounts in that they were telling people things that would make people not want to vote for Republicans because you would think that they were Russian propagandists. And then it turned out that they were. Remember all that? I don't remember exactly how they straightened that whole thing out. But at any rate, Tennessee was QAnon-y and Russia propaganda-y from the beginning, all the way back in the 2016 election. And they also invited some very questionable characters to attend the Republican National Convention as their guests. You remember all of this? Anyway, I asked yesterday, what have they done to counteract this? I mean, at some point, the conference or caucus chairman there should say, you're killing us as Republicans. We need you to withdraw this bill. And I was wondering whether that pressure came yesterday. And Mighty OCD said he's been there and nope, nothing happened. But I guess this morning he shares this news, and maybe this will give us some indication of what they might be doing to try and undo some of this. I'll just, didn't I open this up? Why didn't it open? Marriage bill creating path around same-sex unions causes ruckus in House committee. I guess that's the way they were trying to sell it, is we got to get around the allowance for same-sex marriage. I don't know what made them think, I know, marrying kids will be a legitimate way around this, but I don't know. We'll find out. And here's a picture of Representative Tom Leatherwood making his case yesterday on the floor, although it really looks like he's making his case in a high school auditorium. I mean, the way the seating is. The people in the seats appear to be adults. But I didn't want to worry you too much, because with Tom Leatherwood trying to marry kids, you know, if he might really be in a high school auditorium, and I didn't want to unfairly tar him with that. So maybe we'll dive into that later on and find out what was the progress that was made. And here's a note from Greg. Greg, I could just have you. I'll say hello and either give you a chance to. I could read the note you sent, or you could. What do you want
I could read it.
All right.
Suppose.
Yeah, I just disappeared from my screen, so why not make you do it? Good morning.
All right. Well, I was just looking around here, and according to a report from October of 2021, child marriage is currently legal in 44 states. Only Delaware, Minnesota,
Dang.
New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island have set the minimum age at 18. 20
Yuck.
U.S. states don't require any minimum at all. But all you need is a parental or judicial waiver. I hope Judge Roy Moore isn't listening. But
that's
there's
why
apparently a lot of places in the country you could do this. So Tennessee, frankly, isn't out of the mainstream.
Wow. Well, that's bad news, and he must be so angry. What are you talking about? He's engaging in whataboutism. He's getting engaged to someone who engages in whataboutism, and they're 14. But I guess that's not necessarily the only place. I guess they were one of the places that at least made it difficult. You needed a judicial waiver. They're getting rid of the judicial waiver thing is the problem.
Right. And, again, there's a difference between having this on the books for years and decades and centuries, and on the other hand, let's do this now.
Yeah, let's go back to it. We've fixed it. But I don't know. And as yesterday's show illustrated, I don't know. Tennessee just has I don't know. They seem to be top heavy in people who are very interested in this and are exercising their ability to do that. And it's kind of odd how many stories there were from Tennessee. Now, if you dig, there's probably the same number of stories all over the place. But I don't know, corrected by population, normalized by population, as we do with the COVID numbers, I think Tennessee might be in trouble.
Right. Well, the general approach of the GOP is to promote toxic masculine laws or issues.
Yes.
So that they could basically get their voters to vote GOP, and to the extent that it works, they win, or at least in their mind.
Yeah, well, that one particular guy.
Women need to vote. Women need to outvote them.
Yeah, although sometimes it just doesn't work, as in the case of, who did we read about yesterday? David Byrd, who apparently had a little bit of a reputation with the girls' basketball team at the high school, and when it came out, he ran for office and won 70-something% of the vote. So, more
well, in this crazy mixed-up world,
yes.
I do want to take a second and acknowledge and mourn the death of Eric Bollard. That was a big deal.
Yes, I almost put that.
A train hit his
my
bicycle
head.
in New Jersey where he was bicycling. And the best thing I've seen written so far is by Charles Pierce, which is not unusual because he often writes the best thing that's around. But he says he's one of the only media critics who mattered. He was 57 years old. Charlie says, I got the news at the funeral of another friend, which I suppose is the way things go in this year of our Lord 2022, even though it's increasingly obvious that the Lord has taken this year off. Eric Bollard, who fashioned for himself a career as one of the only media critics who really mattered, was killed while riding his bike through his beloved New Jersey suburbs. He was 57, but his spirit was decades younger, his wisdom decades older. He was gloriously unimpressed by reputations. He was implacable foe of journalistic laziness in all forms, especially as expressed through access journalism and the reportorial arch heresy of both sideserism. Take him all in all, he was something of a proud throwback to what the craft of journalism ought to be. It pains me as a professional to know that a lot of famous yahoos are going to get a freer ride now that he's gone, although I feel certain that the likes of Dan Frimkin and Margaret Sullivan, and in its own little way, this Shabine, will carry on his work as best we all can.
Yes, that was a shocker. Right in the middle of the day, heard that news, and I didn't really hear the details of it, but I don't know. And it's one of those things that makes you briefly say, don't do anything. Don't go anywhere. Don't ride anything. But it's just an unpredictable world and one of those things.
Yeah, still under investigation. We overlapped at Daily Kos, but I didn't really know him except online where we were Twitter friends.
Yep.
But very, very sad.
Unbelievable. A lot of people, it's always shocking from whatever cause. 57 is a bit of a shock for everybody, but especially in an accident like that.
Yeah, he was just a kid.
Basically, it's a new kid. 57. That's fine for me. I'll stay a kid for a while. But I'm staying out of Tennessee.
Yeah, and also stay alive.
Yeah.
It's just, it also, hits home to me, maybe to other people, how individual deaths hit you hard, whereas reading about hundreds or thousands or more of deaths, as in Ukraine, also hits hard, but not with the same kind of impact unless you learn something about it that's different. COVID deaths. Well, we have 1 million of them.
Yeah.
Ukraine. Well, there's 6 million or so refugees and lots of deaths. But when we're talking about torture and war crimes, that gets your attention. This is a piece in Spiegel, which I've translated with my poor translation tools. I think it's in English somewhere. I just don't have the English version directly under my fingertips, so I sent you the German one. But what it says is Russian soldiers discussed atrocities against civilians over the radio. The images of murdered civilians from Bucha shocked the world. According to Spiegel information, the BND recorded the radio traffic of suspected perpetrators. Accordingly, the brutal acts are part of the strategy of Putin's army. Now, New York Times had satellite photos showing that a lot of the bodies were there prior to Russians leaving, so that their claim that the Ukrainians did it and then tried to frame them doesn't wash. There's physical evidence that that's not true. Really, and now we have verbal evidence of what's going on.
Man, they are really going for it all here.
Yeah. So, that's a big deal, and that's passing around. So Europeans are even more upset than they were the day before, and they're talking about all sorts of different sanctions, certainly with coal. And you might say, well, oil and gas is what matters, but coal is still billions of dollars.
All right. I mean,
I see the Washington Post picked up on the story, so now it's in English. Russian talk of civilian killings intercepted is actually their headline now.
Oh, okay.
Germany says it picked up messages on killings undermining Moscow's claims it was not involved. I may have overlooked it, but I didn't think that was the headline when I started putting together the stuff for the show this morning.
Okay.
But it's
I found it in English.
Yep, but it's there now.
Okay. Yeah, Julia Davis is tweeting it around in English from Der Spiegel. But okay,
and
now we got the
Julia
Washington Post.
Davis, speaks other languages, which is really quite helpful. And kudos to those who do. I don't.
Yes.
But
I'll send it to you for
it's
later.
a big deal, and it's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, I should say so. President Zelensky, I saw just the other day, and would have mentioned it to you yesterday, but yes, renewing his call for the possibility of removing Russia from its inherited seat on the UN Security Council.
Well, an issue we brought up here on the show a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
Because process says that what happened is that when the Soviet Union dissolved, Russia just inherited the seat, but they never really voted on it.
Right. That's the claim. And I was repeating that here at home, and then I was thinking, as a process person, I guess I should check. I don't know that they didn't vote. No one tells me what's going on at the UN, and I don't watch that closely. But they might be right about that. I certainly got the sense that they just said, for stability's sake, we'll hand it to the Russians, because they'll protest if we take it away from them. And it's in the charter, and we got to do something. But yeah, Zelensky pointing out, nobody ever really just, why doesn't the body get to vote on this? This is a permanent seat with a veto and everything. And I always worry about this, the mobster government in Russia. I have wondered about that. What do you think that would be some kind of a coup for like the Gambino crime family to acquire nuclear weapons and a seat on the UN Security Council? You would say, we might need to reform our charter if that's the case. So,
well,
I
feel like we did our job in informing people that, in fact, that might come up.
Good.
And
you
it
just
came up.
guessed that? All right. Well done.
So here's what the Washington Post says. Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service claims to have intercepted radio communications in which Russian soldiers discuss carrying out indiscriminate killings in Ukraine. In two separate communications, Russian soldiers described how they question soldiers as well as civilians and then proceed to shoot them. According to an intelligence official familiar with the findings who, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity because the matter is sensitive. The findings, first reported by the German magazine Der Spiegel, I like when you give credit to where credit is due.
Right, good job.
And confirmed by three people briefed on the information, further undermine claims by Russia that atrocities, including in Bucha, were being carried out only after its soldiers leave occupied areas. See, we covered that too. The people also said the radio traffic suggests that members of the Wagner Group, a private military unit with close ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin and his allies, Putin, as they say in France, played a role in the attacks on civilians while Russian forces were in control of the town. Another person briefed on the intelligence said the involvement could have been by the Wagner Group or other private contractor, and Chechens were also reported to be in the area. So a lot of investigative work still needs to be done before accusing anybody of your specifics. But Ukrainian intelligence, apparently, according to Twitter, leaked the names of people who were known to be in the area on the Russian side, including the commanders.
That's troublesome, though, isn't it? I think that in itself might be a Geneva Conventions problem, but I suppose
they weren't
under fighting fire with fire.
They were just like here's the makeup of the units that we know that were there.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe they get away with that one. I'm not a Geneva Conventions person.
Geneva Convention.
I'm in favor.
People who are actively fighting.
Yes. Right. Well, if they're doing
that. It's supposed to separate military from civilian and what you could do with POWs. But I don't think there's anything in the Geneva Convention, people can correct me, that says that you're not allowed to identify by name people who are on the other side actively fighting who aren't prisoners.
No, I suppose that's because, I think I'm confusing it with the release of names of prisoners, and they're not prisoners.
These are commanders, right? Yeah. These are the commanders of the people.
Right. So I suppose that's
Wagner Group. Here's who's in the Wagner Group.
All right. Okay. That seems all right to me then, perhaps. Or if it isn't, then let's change it to Geneva Conventions.
So I just thought I would point out all that stuff is happening.
Yeah. I saw some rumors about that yesterday, and that Russian soldiers are apparently entertaining themselves by shooting civilians for fun. And,
well, that stuff I can't confirm.
Right. No one can. And it's awfully... It's horrific, and it's the kind of, frankly, it's the kind of thing you would say you heard rumors about if you really, really, really wanted to paint the other side in bad light. So it's very difficult to know.
So I'm trying to stay away from propaganda, but
I love
this is what the intelligence services are saying.
This
and
is
in
hard,
fact, there's a report that's what the intelligence
reporting.
services are saying, and that's quite different than some random guy on Twitter.
Right. But a random guy did say that, so I just want you to know.
Okay. So a lot of that is a big deal. Now,
yes.
Here's Phillips O'Brien, one of my favorite military analysts, saying, look, this is exactly the right kind of question we need to be asking ourselves. Mario Draghi from Italy says, do you prefer peace or the air conditioning on? That's the question we should be asking ourselves. And Italy has already said it's not for Italy to determine what the European Union does, but if everybody decides to cut off gas and oil, we're there. Germany's already said we can't do that. We can't, not that fast. We will cut off coal.
All right.
But again, the importance of these, the Russians actually planned the atrocities reporting is that it puts more pressure, especially on Germany, but the rest of the European Union, to say, okay, well, we're going to have to do more than what we're doing.
All right. No surprise that there's more rapid response on coal, though the origins of the European Union are as a coal and steel trading community. So I suppose they have the mechanisms in place. Maybe not so much for natural gas.
Yeah. Now, there's another piece that Phillips O'Brien had from the day before that I wanted to go over because he's talking about really the contours of the war. And he and Michael Kaufman, who also is a very good military analyst, are agreeing on most of this. Kaufman's a little more pessimistic about how things are going for Ukraine, but interestingly to me, Blinken was just interviewed. And among the things that Blinken said is for every Russian tank, Ukraine has 10 anti-tank systems. And during an interview with NBC, Blinken said the U.S. and his allies have provided or will soon provide Ukraine with 10 anti-tank systems for every Russian tank. And he also said, while it may take time, there's no scenario in which Ukraine doesn't win.
Wow.
That's the first time that the Americans have said that about the Russians.
Okay.
They're going to lose. And they've been very slow compared to the military analysts on Twitter, who have had a pretty good feel for how badly the Russians are doing. That's what Phillips O'Brien pieces here. The Russian army might be in worse shape than imagined, and I've probably been about as skeptical about the condition as anybody. So as skeptical as I am about the condition, it's worse.
Wow. Okay.
It also looks like Putin doesn't trust forces that were not sent to Ukraine in the first place. Why? There are signs that the Russians want to send the troops that have pulled out of Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy into the Donbass quickly, including those responsible for the Bucha massacre. Pentagon sources are saying that the plan is to send about two-thirds of the forces Russians have pulled out of the north and redeploy to the south and east. And to make a long story short, they're not necessarily combat ready. They need R&R. If you just throw them back into the meat grinder, they'll be destroyed. And it takes time to circle from the north to the east outside of Ukraine, whereas the Ukrainian lines obviously are much shorter. So he says, this is an army in terrible shape and running out of options. These troops have been worn down, defeated, lost much of their equipment, and would under any circumstances be close to being combat ineffective. And that's not a science, but throughout history, unit performance is degraded considerably when the factors rise. Loss of personnel and equipment, time in combat operations, battlefield failure. All of these are now high for the Russian forces being redeployed. These troops in any rational system would be rested, re-equipped, allowed time before being sent to another stressful combat situation. That Putin's going to try and do it with these forces reveals these four things which show how difficult the long war scenario is for Russia. One, the Russians don't trust the rest of their armed forces. If they could, they'd be sending fresh troops. Two, they're willing to basically see the best part of their army wiped out. If for some reason they could get these troops back to other parts of Ukraine and they go into combat again, hard to see what would be left of them. Three, they don't care. Four, the Russians are out of ideas. And what does it mean? Russia really does not want to fight a long war, and Ukraine is a real opportunity. If the Ukrainians can be resupplied and redeployed to meet the Russian redeployment, they can basically waste the only combat force the Russian government believes in. And that's why it's so important to get help to Ukraine now.
That's a point.
We've had another test of arms in the Donbass. Putin is clearly trying to use military force to save something he can call a victory from the original failure. Until that contest is decided, negotiations can't decide anything, so keep talking, but most importantly, help Ukraine to militarily succeed. Now, two things to note here. The UK Ministry of Defense map also has Russian forces almost all gone from northern Ukraine, putting more stress on the time needed to re-equip the withdrawn forces, which is sensible. It isn't easy. If the Russians send those troops quickly, it's a sign of panic. And separately, the other analyst said, if you really want to simplify it, Russia has plenty of arms and munitions and gear and what they call kit, but not enough troops.
Uh-huh.
The Ukraine
they trust anyway.
Forces have enough troops, but they don't have enough arms and equipment and kit. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's so important to rearm them. And that's why Blinken's comments about sending 10 anti-tank missiles for every single tank that the Russians have left.
Is that too much? I don't know.
Okay. Well, sometimes you miss.
Like 2. But, 10. I don't know whether that's just hyperbole or that's
but
ratio.
He's making the point. They need gear. They have the men. Russia has the gear, but they need the men. Of course, a lot of the parts for their gear, like for missiles, are made in Ukraine.
Well, then that'll hold them back.
Ukrainians don't feel like resupplying them, so they're running out of missiles.
Well, the Ukrainians need to make the rest of the parts.
They went to China to ask for help, and China said no.
Yes, right. They want to stay out of it. Okay. Well, ordinarily a free market would step in here, and they would trade, and everything would be even.
They should probably go to eBay and just get what they need.
Right. Well, but
Amazon
that's where they have to go.
48 hours with drones. Oh, but drones.
They
Sorry, we shut down the delivery that was coming to us. I'm so sorry.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and pingless Greg Dworkin with us. He's fiddling with his sound system here, and I think you've eliminated
playing with
one of the
TweetDeck, which sounds like a submarine looking for something to kill.
Yeah,
so Phillips O'Brien, who is a professor of strategic studies, University of St. Andrews, and his most famous book is How the War Was Won. So one can say he's an expert on winning wars. Has a very recent little thread here, which I think is worth saying. Thread about Russian options in the East, South, and timelines. We talk these days about Russia wanting to tie up operations by May 9th, Victory Day, and making major advances either to cut the Ukrainians off in Donbass or move up to Dnipro. This is a huge area of operations that would require skillful planning and coordination, motivated forces, great supply. It's not something the Russians have given any indication to this point they could pull off, especially with an army that's been suffering for 6 weeks. First, the size. To put the area of operations in context, the distance from Kharkiv to Mariupol is 260 miles. In UK terms, it's almost the length of England, London to Sunderland. In U.S. terms, it's like going New York City to
Washington, D.C. WDC and then back to Baltimore. I see it. Yeah. WDC.
Washington, D.C.
We don't really use that.
Yeah.
D.C.
What the heck is WDC? What are they talking about?
Is he English? Is that what it was? Is that his problem?
It's going
What's your problem?
What is it? 202.
Yeah.
Use the area code. The Russians are not only going to have to move up and down long lines of advance if they're going to take these areas, they're going to have to hold them. Right now, they have nowhere near enough troops to do that. And on the north end of this operation, the Russians have deployed 30 battalion groups of approximately 800 to 1,000 soldiers. They've been in combat for almost 6 weeks, and for all the talk about the importance of seizing Izium, they've advanced about 10 miles in 3 weeks. Right? So they have 24,000 tired soldiers to control a large area, which is also supposed to drive through determined Ukrainian resistance and create a pocket while protecting its long supply lines. Good luck with that. And the situation in the south is even trickier. Russians have too many different areas of operations. They have battalion groups fighting from Mariupol to Kherson, which is almost exactly the same distance as Mariupol to Kharkiv. They have far fewer troops here. Russian troops around Kherson are already getting pushed back. It's why I've been banging on about seeing what kind of reinforcements the Russians bring. They don't have anything like enough forces to undertake the kinds of operations people seem to be talking about. Again, they don't have the troops. If they're counting on the withdrawn Kyiv forces mainly, best guess is it's many weeks till they're rested, and all the while the Ukrainians will be reinforcing and resupplying. So if I were a gambling man, which I'm not, I would wager it's more likely we see a major Russian military collapse somewhere in the south and east by May 9th through being overstretched and attrited than a Russian army having seized Dnipro and surrounding the entire Donbass. So he's pretty pessimistic the Russians could pull this off. And that's important because the whole battle of the Donbass is really going to decide the war. They've already lost, the Russians have, up north. And so that's what they have. And if they lose there, they lose everything. And so the question is, what's Putin going to do and what's he going to throw in to make sure that he doesn't have this obvious loss, which, by the way, will be accompanied not only by pressure from the right in his own country on him, but pressure from the world about war crimes, because as they withdraw, you get the document. And one of the things that's so remarkable about what's going on now, and we've seen this in the U.S. in terms of cell phones and documenting issues in our own country, for example, with law enforcement, but cell phone documentation, individual cases, makes for pretty compelling prosecution.
Yeah.
Here's the evidence. You want the evidence? Here's the evidence.
Yeah, I think it'll be the first war crimes tribunal to have, crowdsourced evidence.
Exactly. Which we know pretty well worked for January 6th insurrectionists.
Right.
Crowdsourcing really identified a lot of them and got them convicted. So, yes, it works.
Yeah. And I don't know. Depending on who's conducting the tribunal, they may or may not be so picky about all the legal niceties. After all, a lot of people who were identified on video here didn't get the harshest sentences in the world, but different crimes involved here and a different tribunal. It'll be very interesting to watch, to say the least. And we'll all literally watch it because it's videoed. It's going to be really something. Okay.
Right. So again, that's what's going on, and it's going to take a while for all of that to sort of work itself out.
I guess so. If they hire Blackwater, if Russia hires Blackwater, would they go? That's an interesting thing. Can you hire Blackwater? Will they say yes to working in this operation? And if they'd hired them earlier in this operation, they might have gotten a contract. But I think now Eric Prince knows not to sign
Here's
on.
Another indication of how things go, and this is from the Kyiv Independent. Kharkiv Oblast governor says that the mayor of one of their towns there, Bala Klia, fled to Russia after having been accused of collaborating with the Russians.
Well, then they were right.
One gets the impression.
Yeah, you could flee anywhere. Don't flee there if you want people to think they might have been wrong about you. But off he goes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Anyway, that's what's happening overseas. One should mention, since we like to follow overseas things, the Israeli government had a one-vote majority, sort of similar to our Senate. Knesset had a one-vote majority for the current Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett.
Yes, right, okay. I remember.
And the speaker there decided to defect. Didn't join the other side, but left the ruling coalition. So now the two sides are tied. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they automatically have a new election. Now they get the jockey about whether or not they can have enough votes to overturn the status quo, and it's not clear they do. There could be a caretaker government for a very long time. It's just one of those things to keep an eye on.
Parliamentary democracy.
It could have snap election. Parliamentary politics is really where you want to talk about process.
Yeah. So I guess they just...
what happens if you have a one-vote lead? Well, then your party gets to pick the prime minister. Well, what happens if they're tied? Well, there's 6 different options that can happen.
Well, I guess I think mostly, I don't know, maybe the Israelis...
The one side could lead. The other side could lead. The one side could put up somebody else. The other side could put up somebody else. Nobody could lead. Everybody could lead.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're just allowed to sort of hobble on until you start losing routine votes for anything.
Or no confidence votes.
Right. And then somebody will say, I mean, you can always call for that, but I guess they take them relatively seriously. But if you start trying to make routine policy and start losing those votes, that's usually the indication that then they say, all right, well, now we'll have a no confidence vote. The implication there, once you have that vote, is if you lose that vote or win it, depending on which side you're on, then you do things like say, all right, now we have to reorganize the government. But I think that usually they just go with momentum there, the inertia of having a government in place. And if they can continue to convince people from various parts of the other coalitions to vote yes on the new, whatever policy, then everybody just says, oh, all right, government's still operating, I guess. And then when they hit a tough one is when things start to fall apart.
Well, I think their budget is passed, so I think they have a little leeway to, coast.
All right,
but
I'm going to
again,
suggest
just
child
keep an eye on
marriage.
it. You'll hear all sorts of things, most of which will turn out not to be true.
Okay.
Oh, they lost the majority. What does that mean? Good luck figuring it out.
Yeah, here in America, sometimes. There, not so much. But if they want to stress test the system, child marriage bill would be a great idea. And try to take something up like that. Ban Disney from Israel. See how it goes. But otherwise, if they stick with small bore stuff, I think they can just limp along if they feel like it.
Right.
But no one will feel like it. They're tough partisans.
All right. I'm going to quote a famous philosopher and deep thinker who also does the research.
Okay.
And see if you can figure out who it is.
Okay. Whoops. All right,
I just received my second Moderna booster vaccine, and I feel good. I'm going to wear my mask and keep my distance because the virus ain't over, fool.
All right. Mr. T?
You got it.
Who else really would say that? Okay. Moderna.
Yeah.
Second Moderna booster. All right. Well, that's a good reminder, too, that Mr. T is of that age where he will be getting second boosters.
Mr. T is no fool. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Right. I would pity.
And if he were, I wouldn't tell him. I wouldn't be the one.
Right. Okay. Well, second booster. Good for him. And good for you as well if you would want to go and get one. I guess I'm now eligible for this and I have to start. Was there any instruction about how long it should be since your last booster before you go in?
People are starting to ask Mr. T all those questions.
Mr. T?
I said, Mr. T, you may not know the answer to this, but at the very least, you should be CDC spokesman. So you should have at least, if you're eligible, if you're over 60, 50, or whatever it is you need to be, at least 4 months since your last.
If you ever saw the A-Team, go get a booster.
Yeah, do not argue with Mr. T.
Right. Not only that, but then you would be old enough to get the booster.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Well,
all right. Meanwhile, Trump is still giving interviews saying that he wasn't at fault for January 6th. I would have marched. They were just, all good people. And the reason there was violence was Nancy Pelosi because she didn't do anything to stop it. Right. I'm hitting you in the face, and it's your fault because you didn't block me.
Right. Why are you hitting yourself? It's good explanation.
Now, those of you who think that you just don't want to hear from Donald Trump anymore, I'm telling you, he's our best get out the vote tool. He won't go away. These headlines are there all the time.
All right.
Right. And it's our job to tie that to the current GOP, which is not difficult in some cases.
Right. It is the current GOP.
Yes.
So, yes. All right. Good. I don't mind. And he's good fodder for the show. I know everyone hates him and wishes he would go away, but what can you do? Some guys you got to keep an eye on. So, all right, and he won't shut up, which is great because sometimes the more he talks, the more of his friends we can put in jail.
Right. It's interesting as people following very closely what's going on with the BA2 variant. There is no question that the BA2 variant is taking over. It's like 77% of samples measured. Mm-hmm. The number of cases is going up.
Yes.
But what's not happening is the number of hospitalizations going up. And what's not happening is that we're seeing the beginning of a wave that looked like the first Omicron wave. We're simply not seeing that at this time. I expected a wave, although not as bad, in mid-April. It's mid-April.
Oh.
And, we're seeing the infections, but we're not seeing the aftermath of that. So, again, too early to tell. But just of note, sometimes things explode. It's not at the current time. As of this moment, we'll see what happens at noon. It's not exploding.
Okay. Well, that's good news. I did see something passed around that India thinks it's tracking another subvariant, the successor, I guess, to BA2, which is referred to here in this piece as variant XE. I don't know. That's the first I've heard of it. And as you might expect, more transmissible than anything ever, but so far not causing severe symptoms or any worse, certainly, than any other more recent variants. So it's nice. We have, if this is the case, then we have a trend of, all right, yes, greater transmissibility, but even less severe symptoms. I'd trade that. And if we're ever going to have to give up and let this thing take over our lives or just become endemic, as they refer to it, and I don't know whether they're using the term correctly or not.
The new variants are actually from the Omicron lineage.
Yes, that's
XD is one of them. There's another one.
Subvariants. I don't know why they call
BA2 plus L452R. They're going to have to rename that one.
Yeah, you want to cut that back.
That mutation in L452R is what made the Delta variant so transmissible.
Oh, okay.
So people are keeping an eye on those, but again, that doesn't mean that waves happen. We're not seeing the BA2 wave just yet in the U.S. It's still too early. It's way too early to say anything about those variants at this point. Just they're there. They're always going to be there.
Yeah,
there's every reason to put all your resources in getting vaccinated and boosted.
Yes,
and hopefully tracking how many cases there are is almost impossible because people are cutting down on testing, so you don't really know. And the testing alone isn't as reliable as the hospitalizations, but the hospitalizations are late. So we have wastewater early, and we have hospitalizations late, and we don't have that good real-time tracking, which, by the way, the whole thing about pandemic preparedness was to try to get it set up so that you could do those things, and we're not. So it's a major, major, major disappointment.
We're very tired. Like Russian troops, there should have been a rest before we were redeployed, and it hasn't happened, and you see what goes on. You get fatigued, and you don't fight very well.
So if you look at the wastewater from Massachusetts, the southern system and the northern system are combined, and the southern system may already have peaked. The northern system still going up a little bit, but nowhere near that enormous peak that we saw with the original Omicron.
What do you mean by northern system? What is that?
Well, they have wastewater systems.
Yeah. And where's the northern?
So north is north of Boston and south is south of Boston.
Okay. All right. So how far does it stretch? Like all the way up, or is it just Massachusetts that they're?
Massachusetts. This is all Massachusetts stuff.
All right. I was just wondering because as I'm doing the maps each day, there's very definitely the numbers are most concentrated once again in the Northeast and New England. Which I notice is...
Well, that's the bad news and the good news. We get it first, but at the same time, if we're not getting it that bad, that's good for the rest of the country.
Yeah. Well, it's been interesting. I mean, it will migrate to the rest of the country. That's been the purpose of my mapping, is I'm noticing that it migrated into the northeast corner last year as well, so there's possibly some seasonal direction to it. And if that turns out to be the case... should be able to look at the maps and see, when will it return to the southeast, which has been enjoying very low numbers lately. It'd be interesting to see whether that holds.
But as a reminder for somebody who's been tracking flu for a long time, the saying, if you've seen one flu season, you've seen one flu season. It doesn't automatically mean it's going to repeat.
Yeah. Well, I'm just checking. I figured I'd look at the maps a year apart and see if any patterns emerge. And for the most part, I would say, very weak to not really. But at the moment, it seems to look like there's something. We'll see whether that continues.
Right.
I'm going to continue checking. I won't know what it means, but I'm going to continue.
No,
checking.
you should. And take a peek at the wastewater pictures, and you'll see what I mean about the huge Omicron spike that we had in January.
Okay.
Nothing like that now.
Great.
And you'll see the difference
That's
between the
definitely
north system and the south system.
All right.
Which they lay out very clearly on the map. Boston and north, and then everything south of Boston.
Okay. SOBO. No, they don't really use that. But they could.
They don't. They could. They won't.
I will punch you in the face if you... All right.
Anyway, so those are the main things that I've been following.
Okay.
And should mention, I don't know exactly where it stands, but the Senate is probably going to vote on the Supreme Court nominee today.
That's
Ketanji Brown Jackson, and she will be moved from judge to justice.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. And it really doesn't matter what Tom Cotton thinks about it. It's happening anyway.
No.
America, for the most part, is pretty upset with the Republicans in terms of how they're dealing with this. I see Paul Gosar was scheduled to speak at another white nationalist rally, but when it was pointed out to him prior to, so he couldn't claim that I didn't know, he canceled.
Ah, well, that's a new tactic. Good.
Yeah.
Keep doing that.
I'm going to do it unless you notice, in which case I won't. Well, that's fine. So let's keep noticing.
Yeah. Well, we'll inform you ahead of time. The other option is drone strike. You can go if you want. Oh, I canceled. All right. Good. Speaking of the coronavirus and the judicial nomination, I guess the only thing that could stand in the way is a COVID outbreak. And we've had one. And just to follow up on that, it's I guess we got a little too comfortable with things and the restrictions being dropped in the D.C. area. And apparently a big, I guess you can't call it super spreader just yet, but a big outbreak among attendees at the Gridiron Dinner, which I guess they thought it was fine to have again.
Yeah, another lesson for them. Of course, the question is, how sick are they?
Yeah. Well, we'll ask.
If they're not that ill, and it's then they're going to treat it like flu season.
Yeah.
Which is a mistake, but I'm just saying.
True. But, some of them will have to return
relax.
to the Senate to vote.
We all got sick. We shouldn't relax. Oh, we didn't get that sick. I guess we can relax. You know, the whiplash there is pretty indicative of inside the Beltway reporters anyway.
True.
Who are even more than corporations focused on short-term what happened in the last 6 hours.
Right.
Think of it, this is the news cycle. The news cycle went from 24 hours to 8 hours and made us work harder to keep up with it. Well, you don't have to look at everything in an 8-hour time frame. What are my 8-hour profits? Well, if you want to look a little longer term than that. No, it's now.
Yeah.
What are you, a dog? That's what dog says.
What are you going to do when you catch this thing?
Ask a dog what time it is. The dog says, now.
Right. Well, you can't be living in the past.
No.
Or the future, for that matter. Yeah, well, it looks like everybody, Gridiron Dinner would have drawn a big, as they say, A-list crowd. I'll tell everybody else later on. The Washington Post has a piece on it, naming some names of people who are now in isolation, including Merrick Garland, who has gotten the coronavirus. And I think the holy grail for anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers and Anthony Fauci was at the Gridiron Dinner. So I guess if he comes away and says, I have COVID, I'm bracing for a whole, nothing works to prevent COVID. If Fauci got it, but, as it turns out, he's human. And I don't know, maybe he was there in a mask the whole time. I would have been. I don't want the embarrassment of catching COVID as him, but, or the trouble. He's not young. But
I wonder if he was wearing a mask at the dinner.
If
I went. Which I probably wouldn't have. I don't like dinners anyway.
Right. And, of course, the dinner part, if you eat the dinner, which also I would recommend skipping.
Chicken or fish.
Just generally speaking. Yeah, right. So maybe he was wearing one of those really heavy-duty duckbill masks with the straps on the top and bottom that are a real pain in the neck but actually work. And I don't know. So far, so good. No word that he himself is sick. But, Merrick Garland, who's busy.
This is the same article, but I'm just sending it to you because it's the English version of the Spiegel piece.
Yes. All right. Okay. Well, we can read it in that
So you can read it rather than having to translate it yourself.
Right. It's all one word, but it is English.
Right.
You just translated it.
Okay, so that's the story.
Very
and,
good. Thank you.
I'll be back with you on Monday, I think, right? As far as we know.
Well, no. I
That's
now
why
realize.
I ask at the end of every visit here, what are you doing?
What am I doing? Next week is spring break for everybody, which means
you doing college tours?
Yeah. Exactly. So we'll be making the Virginia loops Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and I'm trying to prepare everybody for that and put together some material to keep everyone company, if not full entire shows and just a little stuff anyway. So yeah, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday we'll visit in a week, and I'm sure nothing will have happened. We could probably fit it in 5 or 10 minutes next Thursday. But we'll talk via Twitter, and those of you listening, many of you use Twitter. Basically, the radio show will happen in between us and all of you as well as we trade stories. And you can imagine what I would have said about that funny thing that you just tweeted to me. So, anyway, yeah, it was probably about time for me to tell you that your entire schedule will change next week.
Okay. So no Monday and Wednesday?
Yeah. Probably no Wednesday, too. Wednesday will be, in between two far-flung college campuses in the morning.
And Thursday?
Thursday, we should be back. I should be back Wednesday night.
Oh, in theory. Okay.
Yes, and I really, really want to do a great show Thursday. So save
I would
it all
think
up.
So. I'll do a lot of talking on Thursday.
Yes. Okay.
All
Very
right.
good.
So I'll see you next week. Literally next week.
Yeah, right. We'll tweet the show in between. No problem.
All righty. Take care.
Thank you. You too. And you should go on spring break as well. All right, let's see. So, do you want me to tell you about who was at the Gridiron Dinner? Why not? I will. Oh, look, and there's some pop-up ads in the side here where they were for candies. Delicious. Much better than some of the things that pop up elsewhere. Here's what happened at the Gridiron Dinner. After Gridiron Dinner, so really not at the dinner. You can't blame the dinner. It's the after part that's bad. Like the Gridiron dessert is where this happened. A COVID outbreak among Washington A-list guests, which is, 2 years late, honestly. I mean, I wish that the A-list had been the Trump-era A-list, and they were all sick. Let's see. Who's reporting? Just to give them credit. Paul Farhi, Roxanne Roberts, and Yasmin Abu Taleb. Okay. Got it, I think. Abu Taleb. More than a dozen guests who attended Saturday night's Gridiron Club dinner, including 2 cabinet members, 2 members of Congress, and a top aide to Vice President Harris, have since tested positive for coronavirus, sending ripples of anxiety through a city on the cusp of restarting its traditional social whirl after a 2-year pause. It was fine, paused, leave it, paused. But I bring this up. I don't know whether they make mention of this possibility in the article anywhere or not, but I'll just throw it out there. Again, top aide to Vice President Harris, which means maybe Vice President Harris. I don't know if she was at the dinner herself or not, but a top aide who was exposed, may or may not have exposed Vice President Harris. And if you were worried about the vote for Justice Jackson soon, well then, you'll be worried about the vice president as well, right? It's not supposed to be a tie vote, but how many other people were there who gave it to somebody else, and now you have Democratic senators, let's say, or some of the 3 Republican senators who've come out in support of the nomination, now having to isolate and not being able to show up and cast their vote. And neither is Vice President Harris. What could go wrong, right? But I don't think we're there yet. So let's go on here. A-list guests were asked to show proof of vaccination, but not negative tests. That sometimes happens at these gatherings, and they didn't ask for that. And many mingled freely without masks at the dinner at the downtown Renaissance Washington Hotel. But by Wednesday, Representatives Adam Schiff, I know that'll really please the Republicans, and Joaquin Castro, and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo had announced they had tested positive. They were soon followed by Attorney General Merrick Garland, who requested a test Wednesday afternoon after learning he may have been exposed and discovered that he too carried the virus. Thus far, none have reported serious illness, and that sounds pretty good for Merrick Garland in terms of like, I didn't even suspect that I had it, but I heard some other people got it, maybe at the dinner there. I was there, I guess I better test. Oh yeah, look at that. I have coronavirus. Okay. So I guess he's doing okay. But the Republicans are going to celebrate that. The idea that Adam Schiff and Merrick Garland both get COVID, and maybe even Fauci as well. Jamal Simmons, the communications director for Vice President Harris, said later Wednesday that he too had tested positive and is now isolating at home. But since he had been in close contact with Harris, she would also be consulting with a physician, her press secretary said. The Washington Post has learned of about half a dozen journalists, as well as members of the White House and national security staffs, who said they tested positive after the event. Their names are being withheld because they had not announced their status publicly. Tom DeFrank, a contributing columnist for National Journal and president of the Gridiron Club, whose dinner it was, said that as of Wednesday afternoon, the group knew of 14 guests who had tested positive. There is no way of being certain about when they first contracted COVID, he said in a statement, but they did interact with other guests during the night, and we have to be realistic and expect some more cases. About half of the cases appeared to have been clustered at 3 tables, he said, and the club was taking steps to notify anyone who sat next to or across from infected guests. How many of the infections began at the dinner and how serious the outbreak will be will remain, I guess, still remains unclear and probably will stay unclear for some time. Many of the guests have jobs that require regular testing that catches some asymptomatic cases. Castro and Raimondo said they are suffering only mild symptoms, while Schiff said he's feeling fine and touted the value of vaccinates and boosters. The outbreak at the Gridiron, where some of the comic skits featured actors dressed as the coronavirus, large green bouncing balls with red frills, highlights the personal risk-benefit balancing act that much of the country is doing. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. I'll continue reading this Washington Post piece about the Gridiron Dinner just to give you a watch list, I guess, for people to look out for. The article continues a little further down and skip a little bit. Several of the White House aides who tested positive did so after traveling to Poland last week with President Biden and before the Gridiron Dinner. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, who attended the Gridiron Dinner, reiterated Wednesday that all White House employees who come in proximity to Biden are regularly tested. Biden didn't attend the dinner but appeared via video. The video now has coronavirus, I guess. The white tie and gowns dinner attracted about 630 guests, including members of Congress, the cabinet, diplomatic corps, military, and business. One of the only reasons to have white tie, with I guess the exception of sometimes people go, I mean, I don't know, not anymore. Nobody goes in white tie to inaugurations anymore. I think that's probably dead as far as the traditions go, but I don't know. I guess people think it's fun to still have that stuff. Trump, of course, now comes to mind when he went in white tie to visit the Queen in London and looking ridiculous. Remember that he insisted on he thought that the waistcoat or waistcoat should have been much longer. For some reason, I guess probably to cover his gut, and didn't really realize how small it's supposed to be, and ended up looking like a penguin. It was weird. That guy's dumb. Anyway, among those in attendance were Anthony S. Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, and Rochelle Walensky, director of the CDC. Other guests included, ready for the roll call? Senators Susan Collins, okay, Ed Markey, oh, well, we hope not, Amy Klobuchar, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Roy Blunt. Also, Representatives Jamie Raskin, who had quite a day for himself on the floor yesterday in the debate on contempt of Congress charges for various Trumpland figures. Also, Debbie Dingell was there, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, and Special Presidential Envoy John F. Kerry. Remember that guy? Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell, Governors Larry Hogan of Maryland and Chris Sununu of New Hampshire, and New York Mayor Eric Adams. So all on the watch list now for coronavirus. The possibility that senators at the dinner were infected could conceivably delay a Senate vote to confirm Biden's Supreme Court nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson. They do mention this. A vote could come later this week. No delays have been announced. Later this week, they mean today. Last I heard, everything was on track and that they were going to try to have the vote, and they weren't going to use much or any of the 30 hours of post-cloture time, because basically even Republicans, remember, they're fighting against pedophilia and child grooming, but they also want to go home. So they see the confirmation as an inevitability, and rather than stay and make some last stand or more speeches about how they're just fighting for the children, they say, F the children. I mean, that's really the problem, is that too many people are doing that. But that's what they're saying. We'd rather go home than stand and fight for the children. So they've run out of performative gas here, basically. So unless there's a lot of absences, it looks like it'll happen today. I think the word last night was it was scheduled for about 1:30 today. So we'll see whether they stick to that schedule. Let's see. The dinner's guest list also included, if you want to watch out for other people, former NFL great Emmitt Smith, NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, CBS host Jane Pauley and her spouse, Doonesbury cartoonist Gary Trudeau. He can draw a cartoon about it. Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova, Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan, PBS NewsHour anchor Judy Woodruff, ABC chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl, who interviewed the virus, and Washington Post publisher Fred Ryan and editor Sally Busby. So they got it all. Everybody's going to get sick, and all the newspapers and TV news is going to close. After a pre-dinner cocktail reception, guests... Does this matter? I don't know. You want to know what happened? After the cocktail reception, guests sat together at long, narrow tables for hours and watched satirical skits and songs performed by members. At the event's conclusion, guests joined hands for the traditional singing of Auld Lang Syne, which I thought was like a New Year's Eve thing, but I guess they do it all the time at white tie dinners. Every time you put on a white tie, you got to sing Auld Lang Syne. Joining hands, not the danger we first thought it was at the outset of the pandemic, but still. And then singing, that's still a thing we shouldn't be doing. Eating and singing. This dinner is about eating and singing. Don't go. The dinner was supposed to reflect a return to normalcy, and it did, by the way. When there's a disease that is in pandemic mode, I don't know how you would say it, but when there's a pandemic, is one way of saying it, if you get together and eat and sing and hold hands, everybody's going to get sick. That's normal. But they meant doing that without people getting sick. But you know what? They used to just get the flu or colds. So, basically getting together with people will get you sick. Anyway, the dinner was supposed to reflect the return to normalcy after being canceled the past 2 years, cancel culture, because of the pandemic. Few guests wore masks or observed social distancing, according to people in attendance. Only the serving staff was consistently masked throughout the evening because they're peons, and not eating because they're peons. I don't know. You got to stop this stuff. Anyway, while organizers asked attendees to show their vaccination cards at the door, there was no requirement to be tested, but they're all getting tested now. The evening sketches performed by veteran Washington journalists parodied figures in both parties, of course, although Republicans such as former President Donald Trump, Representatives Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Paul Gosar, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and Senators Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton came in for the sharpest jabs. That's a long list for the sharpest jabs. None of those figures were in attendance. Thank God, no one would have had a good time then. At one point, a performer dressed as Fauci sang from the stage to the real Fauci in the audience, Doctor, give me some clues. We've got a bad case of COVID blues. And then everybody killed that guy because that's terrible. The Gridiron Dinner is a smaller, more elite precursor to the better-known White House Correspondents Association gathering in late April. That organization's president, Stephen Portnoy, said earlier this week that it will require its dinner's 2,600 guests to show same-day negative coronavirus tests, which they will be able to upload to an app. And then that app will freeze and collapse, and everyone can blame that. Ooh, the candy ad is back. Anyway, the president typically attends the White House Correspondents Association dinner, although Trump never did during his years in the White House. Biden has not yet announced his plans. The Gridiron Club dinner appears to have been conducted with respect to the latest official guidelines for COVID safety, which obviously suck. The CDC updated this guidelines on February 25th to ease mask recommendations for the vast majority of the country, and all 50 states have lifted their mask mandates in recent weeks. This will change nothing. I mean, look, the CDC says, oh, you can go ahead and do this. And then everybody goes, and the director of the CDC watch ends up coming down with coronavirus, and everyone will say, oh, let's just continue doing the same thing. I almost hope that they get sick at this point. Anyway, more than 95% of the country, including D.C., is classified by the CDC as having low burden of disease, meaning the agency does not recommend a mask mandate. But some experts, and now a bunch of people who have coronavirus, have cautioned that the new CDC guidelines could leave the country unprepared in the event of another wave. The BA.2 variant caused a sharp rise in cases in Europe and has become the dominant strain in the United States. Although, and I think we were, if the early pandemic was the model, I was saying we're about 6 weeks. We stayed about 6 weeks behind Europe in terms of when the spikes happened, but these faster moving things, you would think you might see it a little bit earlier. But I think the 6 weeks has come and gone. We just, and BA.2 is the dominant strain here, but we're just still not seeing the numbers of people having to check into the hospital. So good. Maybe it's losing its punch. The BA.2 variant caused a sharp rise in cases in Europe, has become the dominant strain here, although cases have not yet begun rising nationally, only a little bit. In some parts of the country, including the Northeast, are beginning to experience a modest increase in infections. My map says so. Outbreaks from events such as the Gridiron Dinner could signal what is to come, said Abrar Karan, an infectious disease physician at Stanford University. You'll have these big outbreaks that start slowly, and then you'll notice more of them. It's not surprising to me that there was this big outbreak at a gathering where people were testing afterward, Karen said. We're constantly testing the boundaries. Everybody's testing the boundaries a little bit. We're trying to see what's a tolerable level of risk. But when you have a big outbreak, that makes everybody pause, Karen said. Fauci, who said he has not tested positive, said he abided by CDC guidelines when deciding to attend the dinner. He said he made a personal decision that the risk of attending was low for 3 reasons. He's vaccinated and boosted. There was a requirement for proof of vaccination to enter the dinner. And D.C. is classified as having a low burden of disease by the CDC's metrics. That classification also means individuals can go unmasked in indoor settings. Fauci said he wore his mask during the reception, but took it off to eat. We are in a situation where, as a population, we need to make a decision that is based on data as well as our own individual willingness to take whatever level of risk happens to be present that you're making the decision about, Fauci said. That's okay, whatever. Doesn't tell me that much. I follow the CDC guidelines, which says it's okay to be in an indoor setting without a mask. But if cases go up and CDC says, now, wait a minute, you're in a red zone, you can be darn sure I won't be going to any dinners. You go with what the situation is. And that's the best you can do. And I don't know. I guess I'm not hoping it on him because that'll be just too much. But if the director of the CDC got it, then maybe maybe more people would take more precautions. But, maybe they would all be foolhardy and stupid too. There is that possibility. All right, let's see. Switching gears, by which I mean having reached the end of the article, we can see what else have I put aside for myself to share with you. Let's see. Oh, speaking of Ukraine, I thought this might be an interesting thread, and I didn't check it all the way through to see how interesting, but I think it's, I don't see how you could fail to be interesting in this situation. How long is this thing? It's lengthy. But let's take a look. For those of you who, I don't know, I mean, I think it's warranted if you give pause. You don't have to be a believer or worry that you have become susceptible to Russian propaganda by double checking every once in a while on the, Ukraine is full of neo-Nazis thing. Because Nazism is serious, and you want to watch out for that stuff. And it should be noted, there definitely are weirdo white nationalist neo-Nazis in Ukraine, because there are weirdo white nationalist neo-Nazis everywhere. And recall again that people who know what they know about Ukraine from generations past who fled Ukraine, they were very often fleeing Nazi sympathizing Ukrainians, or at least pre-Nazi anti-Semitic Ukrainians. They've had their trials there. So I thought this might be interesting. And I think I mentioned a while back that I definitely remember hearing, like way before all this, maybe back in the days, it must have been sparked by the invasion of Crimea in 2014. I definitely remember the rumor reaching my ears, through what mechanism I do not know, that, well, maybe you don't want to necessarily root for the Ukrainians in this one because they got a little bit of a, neo-Nazi streak going there. I remember hearing that, and I remember hearing or thinking, I guess that could be like, some of the most, brutal Nazi-sponsored murders of the war were in Ukraine, and sometimes perpetrated by Ukrainian Nazi sympathizers, although, it's a complicated situation, certainly, and you don't really want to excuse people who decided to collaborate with Nazis. But I think we also discussed this fairly recently, that they probably viewed, well, remember, we didn't have the hindsight on Nazis just yet, but the Nazis didn't present very well. That's true. I think everybody kind of knew the Nazis were a bunch of jerks. But rolling eastward as they were on their way to invading Russia proper, and of course Ukraine at that time was still considered Russia proper, I guess, anyway, because part of the Russian Soviet Empire. But probably Ukrainian nationalists at the time thought, an invading army taking on the Soviet army, maybe we could use this to break away. Maybe we should join these guys, whether we adopt their agenda or not. Anyway, this thread is very interesting, from Mariam Naim. I'm hoping I'm not mangling the name too much. M-A-R-I-M, Mariam Naim, N-A-I-E-M, who tweets, we're reading a tweet thread, as Mariam posts, all one word, of course, as a Russian-speaking person of color who was born and raised in Ukraine. How about that? I believe I am in a position to speak to the issue of nationalism and neo-Nazism in Ukraine. And she warns us it's a long thread, and then points down at it. Mariam gives this description of herself in her profile: researcher/designer by day, speaker/artist by night, tweeting on culture, frustration, and memes in Ukrainian/English. She identifies as a Ukrainian of Afghan origin. So really, it's like the Russian army is chasing her around the globe, making her life a living hell. And, well, she's probably not going to have great things to say about the Russians, true. But she's focusing on Ukrainians and the neo-Nazi thing. Is it real? Have I seen it? What does it mean? Let's find out. To talk about Ukrainian nationalism, we first have to establish the context of the relationship between Ukraine and Russia. I might be right here. Let's see. These are not just countries sharing a common border. Our relationship is that of an empire and its colony. Same as with Russia and many other countries and peoples in Eurasia, by the way. If you want a quick tour of Russian colonialism, and I know a lot of people have disputed the use of the term colonialism with them, but there's some good arguments why it should stick. But if you want a quick tour of Russian colonialism, this thread is a great start. It's someone else's thread. It's Maxim Aristavi. I don't know whether that's Aristavi or Aristavi or what, who has a whole thread that goes in a different direction here. I'll read you the first one so you get the idea of it, and you can go back and read this thread if you want. He says, when foreigners casually drop bombing of Kyiv, these pics always come to mind. This is what Russian colonialism, and that's hashtagged, Russian colonialism did to Chechnya and Grozny when they tried to leave the empire in 2000. A war crime of horrific scale, but the rest of the world was like, meh, so Moscow continued. All right. Well, now Mariam continues. So after having recommended this other guy's thread as a great start on Russian colonialism, maybe some other day. The Russian Empire erases the culture of its colonies. The captured lands are renamed Russia, ethnically cleansed and or forcibly assimilated. For Ukraine, this manifested in several genocidal famines and a centuries-long policy of elimination of the language and culture. Not uncommon among European colonial imperial powers. That's true. And I think, the fact that I think somebody I saw questioning the idea of, they're really imperialists. Is that really a fair label for them? And I think one of the better answers that I saw was, consider Siberia and the Russian East. The fact that, you can see Russia from your house in Alaska, like it wraps around the globe. Think at how far it is from Moscow to the far-flung reaches. And what do we call that? We don't call it, anything else. That's Russia. They say it's Russia. It's Russia. Well, it used to be something else. And the people who live there are Asian, and they don't look like Muscovites, and yet it's Russia. And by the way, one of the active programs of the Russian Empire prior to the Bolshevik Revolution and all the way through is to, subsidize them or force even European Russians to move out there and seed the culture. It's it's kind of an ethnic erasure there. Try and supplant the local population with a Russian majority if you can, or at least a significant enough minority to make it look like, yep, that's Russia, because the people look like Russians, because they are. Anyway, let me stick to the experts here. Mariam continues here. Someone else that she cites here, Ewa Thompson, E-W-A, Ewa Thompson, a prominent scholar and advocate of the post-colonial view of Eastern European history, noted there is a distinction between imperialistic nationalism, reaching out aggressively to subjugate and exploit potential colonies, and a defensive nationalism poised to preserve traditions and identities. Defensive nationalism is common to peoples whose identity is in existential danger. For example, the media often mention the ultra-right regiment of Azov. Its founding in the year 2014. The date of Russia's attack on Ukraine, in case you thought that there was any question, 2014. Its current rise in the Ukrainian nationalist and far-right movements is to a large extent caused by Russia's expansive aggression. Here I want to go back. I don't think I fully grasped the importance of what Ewa Thompson was saying here. Two kinds of imperialistic nationalism, or two kinds of nationalism. Imperialistic nationalism, reaching out aggressively to subjugate and exploit potential colonies, like overseas, elsewhere, outside of your territory. And then defensive nationalism. We've been attacked, and now we come together as Ukrainians, and we're now Ukrainian nationalists. They can be motivated by two different things and take two different directions. But they're both nationalism, right? So it shouldn't be nationalism that's the dirty word here. Anyway, that said, Mariam continues, although Ukraine has been oppressed and colonized throughout its history, There are many horrific examples of atrocities and mistreatment against Roma, Jews, Poles, and others committed by Ukrainians. In particular, like the rest of the lands of the former Russian Empire, Ukraine is firmly associated with anti-Semitism in the Jewish national memory. Ukraine is not an ideal place. Ukrainian society is not perfect, and there is racism in it. I have personally encountered racism in Ukraine, she says. We hear a lot about it. What we hear less about is how much Ukraine has improved in recent years. Ukrainians have elected a president whose campaign was based on unity across identities, and this president is of Jewish descent. Jewish communities also support Ukraine in this war, and there's a linked article that attempts to establish that. The headline works. Anyway, as I mentioned, she continues, I have experienced racism in Ukraine, but having lived in the U.S. and Europe, I can say that I was much more likely to encounter institutional racism abroad than in Ukraine. In the past decade, I felt safe in Kyiv, before the full-scale invasion, of course. Now, let's look at the far-right movement. As in many European countries, there are right-wing parties in Ukraine, but unlike places such as Hungary, Italy, and others, in Ukraine, such parties have tiny support. And she offers up a chart that I suppose illustrates that, but it makes no sense to me because I don't know any of these parties, but we'll take her word for it for the moment. The most known Ukrainian far-right parties of National Core and Freedom and Right Sector together received around 2% of the vote in the 2019 parliamentary elections. Compare with the sobering statistics from Europe, and she includes a BBC News article on Europe and right-wing nationalism, a country-by-country guide, if you want to take a look at that. Thus, the actual scale of the far-right problem in Ukraine was significantly overblown by the Western media and Russian propaganda, especially compared to incredible progress in recent years despite the war raging since 2014. And she links to an AtlanticCouncil.org piece, Ukraine offers hope in an increasingly homophobic neighborhood. Then continues on, this is not to say that Ukrainian far-right is not an issue. I am the last person to defend them, but its media coverage is overblown, ignores the good things in Ukraine, and fails to put it in context of European and, especially relevant now, Russian far-right movements. Russia wants the world to believe they are denazifying Ukraine, implying Russia is somehow free of neo-Nazism. But of course, this is very far from the truth. Russian nationalism is expansive. Quoting Professor Thompson again, it is directed outwards, and its bearers are less aware of their own chauvinism. An essential element of such nationalism is the idea of one's own greatness, which becomes a justification for territorial expansion beyond Russia's existing borders. The modern Russian imperial ideology is deeply rooted in aggressive, expansive nationalism. And linked here, an Al Jazeera piece. Putin's philosophers, who inspired him to invade Ukraine. Probably a very interesting study there. You might want to turn around and read that one day. Despite this, I think Russian nationalism is weakly covered in Western media, even when relevant. For several years, Alexei Navalny has been an example of the systemic struggle against the regime in authoritarian Russia, but even Russia's opposition has close ties to nationalism. Around the 2010s, Navalny was expelled from his party for nationalist activities and campaigned to end subsidies to Chechnya and other non-Slavic regions of Russia on ethnically stereotypical grounds. So that's not great. Navalny's nationalism is also evident in his stance on illegally annexed Crimea. When asked about Crimea, he replied that Crimea is not a sandwich. I'm not really certain what that's supposed to mean, but it isn't. and added, Crimea will remain part of Russia and will never become part of Ukraine again in the near future. So, big hero Navalny, not so great on Ukraine. There are more than 100 neo-Nazi groups in Russia, and the number of crimes they commit is growing each year. It's difficult to find accurate information about them, and they are not of such interest to the Western media as Ukrainian ones. For those who thought that the thread was too long and didn't read it, but now you've read it, so it doesn't matter. Quick summary. Western media and Russian propaganda wildly inflate the problem of the Ukrainian far right. The coverage fails to put the Ukrainian far right in a larger context. Once done, it's evident that it is a tiny problem compared to Russian and even European right-wing movements. Russia used to be an authoritarian state, but now it has all the features of a fascist state. Totalitarian propaganda and censorship, popular support for violence, all of this is a portrait of the modern Russia. Okay, wrapped it up that way. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. So, overall, I think a fascinating look at Ukrainian nationalism and right-wing nationalism in the neighborhood of Ukraine and Russia. She did have one last summary. In case you missed the entirety of the previous segment, Mariam Naim wrapping things up with, is Ukraine an ideal country without racism? No. Does the Ukrainian far right have political prospects? No. We hope. I add we hope. But she says no. Is Russia an ideal country without racism, as they imply? No. Does the Russian far right have political prospects? Answer, it already is a fascist state. So I guess yes. Now, I will also add this. This is interesting. Maybe some pushback, just to let you know that there is some out there. I don't know yet whether I agree with it because I'm seeing it for the first time here, but let's see. One person says, I read this, found it fascinating, and retweeted it, but it has just been undermined by Zelensky this morning, addressing the Greek parliament. Why do we say this? Attached here is the tweet of Yanis Varoufakis, who sounds pretty Greek, saying, President Zelensky just abused the Greek parliament's invitation by sharing its platform with members of the neo-Nazi Azov battalion, thus undermining the Ukrainian people's heroic resistance to Putin's criminal invasion. We stand with Ukraine, not with the Azov neo-Nazi battalion. Yeah, that's valid enough, right? Now, let's see. Somebody else tweets here, random person here, that their answer to this is one of the most dishonest takes I've seen, and that says a lot. USSR and Russia aren't synonymous. Post-Soviet collapse, there were logically regional disputes. That's what happens when a region is destabilized. Other cultures were celebrated in USSR. I was forced to learn Ukrainian. I don't know about that. Doesn't really sound like a real thing that happened, forced to use Ukrainian. And then attached is a video of what I guess purports to be soccer fans giving Nazi salutes at a soccer game, which maybe involves Ukraine. There's a lot of people in yellow and blue, but then there's a lot of people in green as well. I'm not really certain why that is, but I don't know what's going on here or what this video is, but all right, soccer people are not really the greatest in general. When you're talking about European soccer fans, do they get rowdy, weird, and right-wing and neo-Nazi? Yeah, in some places they do. Now, somebody else pushing back here. Forced to learn Ukrainian? Where and when? Are you a citizen of Ukraine? And you should learn the official language of the country in school. Be careful there. How are you planning to love on... How are you planning to love on the country and not know the language? Can you live in France without speaking French? All right, well, don't get too crazy nationalist there. That doesn't have good, doesn't give you good vibes here in the United States among progressives complaining about learn the language, damn it. But okay, always pushback out there. It's there. You can read it in the reactions to the threads. I don't think I need to give that exactly the same elevation that the thread got. I thought that was better thought out. All right, let's see. There's more to share with you. Let me go back to Pocket and scoop some of it up, and I guess maybe we'll run through the Twitter thread feed as well. Let's see. How about this? A little update on legal happenings. There were a lot. I might save the Supreme Court stuff for tomorrow because it warrants greater discussion, but outside of Supreme Court happenings, which there were some yesterday, more shadow docket happenings that really once again call the whole practice into question, and I think, well, maybe we'll do it today, really a prelude to their eventually saying among the conservative justices, to hell with it, we're just going to, not only are we going to be outcome focused, but we're going to just stop when giving an opinion, an explicit reasoning for our conclusions will reveal too much about our outcome-orientedness. We just won't do it. That's why the shadow docket seems like such an attractive tool to them, because it's often expected that it won't come with written opinions or at least vast and expansive opinions, and they can just say, do the thing we said because we say so, and leave it at that. That's why it's become such a popular tool for them. Anyway, outside of the Supreme Court setting, The Hill reports judge rules that Bannon, Steve KGB Bannon, cannot argue he was relying on legal advice in defying his January 6th committee subpoena. So that's good news. We'll see whether it means anything. And whether other people pay attention to it. A federal judge on Wednesday ruled that Stephen Bannon cannot argue that he was relying on his lawyer's advice in defying a congressional subpoena when the former Trump advisor goes on trial on contempt charges this summer. In a 4-page decision, U.S. District Judge Carl Nichols rejected Bannon's argument that he should be allowed to raise the legal defense despite court precedent that holds that it is invalid in the context of criminal contempt of Congress charges. The ruling is a blow to Bannon's legal defense, as his lawyers had been hoping to argue at trial that he was relying on their good faith advice when he defied the subpoena from the House January 6th Select Committee. Bannon was indicted in November on the misdemeanor contempt charges after Congress issued a criminal referral to the Justice Department in response to his stonewalling. Congress later voted to hold former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in contempt over his own defiance of a Select Committee subpoena, but Democrats have grown increasingly frustrated as federal prosecutors have yet to bring charges nearly 4 months after the House issued its criminal referral. On Wednesday, the Select Committee is set to vote on whether to refer 2 more Trump aides, Dan Scavino and Peter Navarro, to the full House for a contempt vote. The ruling by Nichols, a Trump appointee, could make it harder for the Select Committee's targets to justify defiance of congressional subpoenas if the Justice Department continues to bring charges on the House referrals. I'll pause here for a second to say I think that yesterday, that must have been the context in which Jamie Raskin was doing so much fighting on the House floor. I know they were considering contempt charges for somebody yesterday, and I didn't follow closely enough, but I guess if you piece things together, maybe that is for Scavino and Navarro. Who they were fighting about on the floor yesterday. I say fighting about. Raskin was giving his speeches, and I believe, he was responding to comments from Kevin McCarthy, who was trying to sweep everything under the rug. He had some interesting way of putting it. But then Empty Head G there, Marjorie Trader Green, made her own speeches, screaming about her various things. But then when her speech was over, she stood on the floor and screamed about everybody else's speech. She was heckling Raskin and shouting things out off mic and screaming about stuff like Ashley Babbitt and what about the whole Russia hoax and stuff like that. Very annoying. And they really need to bonk her over the head with the mace there and kick her out. But, whatever. They're not getting around to it. I'm tired of reminding people. I promise you she is a Q assassin. She never gave up on her Q connections, though she said she did. She just did that to try to escape scrutiny and then just brought more scrutiny on herself. You can't be the kind of person she is and not snap. That's the worry that I have. You can't be someone who fully purports to believe that all Democrats are pedophile vampires and that Q, is right, and also be a gun nut, and also try to be such a tough gal, I guess. I don't see how you can pronounce ultimatums, and pronounce fatwas, essentially, against every Democrat in the world, and of course their elected representatives, and that they've all committed these heinous crimes, and I'm armed, and I have the right to make citizens arrests and stop people from committing these crimes, and just do nothing forever. I don't think it's possible. So I'm telling you, we're one day going to be like, how did we miss the signs? Oh no, they really got to do something. But it's very difficult to say. I mean, from a process standpoint, there isn't a lot to do. She has to do something super crazy and endanger people before they can take action. Yes, they're going to have to wait for her to pull a gun and try to shoot somebody before they finally say, all right, that's it. You can't be on this floor. You're expelled. And then the Republicans won't even vote to expel her. So who knows? We'll see. Anyway, yes, right. Back to where we were. There was the ruling by the judge, who was a Trump appointee here, saying, no, Bannon can't say, oh, my lawyer told me I was allowed to defy subpoenas, so that's why I did it. That's not going to fly. It's not a pleading you can make. And it says here, it could make it harder for the Select Committee's targets to justify defiance of congressional subpoenas if the Justice Department continues to bring charges. First of all, the Justice Department has to bring those charges. Second of all, it only makes it harder for the committee's targets to justify their defiance this way if they care about court rulings, which I don't think that they do. I'm not 100% convinced that you won't find Bannon just continuing to make that claim. The difference is now that there's a ruling in place, when he's on trial, he can try and, you can blurt out whatever you want. And he'll continue to say, yeah, I was relying on the advice of my attorneys. But in that context, in the courtroom context, the judge can say, listen, hold on a second. Just everybody suspend, bang the gavel, and everybody has to stop talking on pain of being held in, contempt of court right here from the bench, for which, yeah, you'll be dragged out. You can stop things and say, listen, the jury has to disregard this. I don't care how many times this guy says this. The rule is that you're not allowed to even consider that he said this. It's not a valid argument. If he continues to blurt it out, I'll hold them in contempt and I'll fine the lawyers. But, yes, he'll say it, but no, it can have no legal effect. And then there's just the question of, can the jury really just, train themselves to forget that stuff or not? It's very dicey. And it certainly won't stop others from pleading the same thing, because they do this all the time. No, your ruling said Bannon couldn't do it. It didn't say me, Navarro, can't do it. Well, obviously it stands for the same thing. It's a legal principle. No, we'll see. If you want to rule against my interest in using that pleading, then go ahead. But I'm going to make you pause proceedings and issue that ruling. And even then, I'm going to ignore the ruling. And you can put me in jail for contempt. I don't even care, Bannon will say. Maybe Navarro has a different view of things. Anyway, so that's where we stand. That's the end of the article, because the rest of it is about people not responding to requests for comment. But we'll keep an eye on that. I'd be interested to see whether they continue to try to do that stuff anyway, or whether other defendants make courts go through the same exercise or not. I guess in other legal news, this Politico piece from the other day has been sitting here waiting to be shared with you. Josh Gerstein and Kyle Cheney reporting on April 5th, 2 days ago. Court orders January 6th defense lawyer disbarred. How do you like that? Yeah, they are crackpots after all, eh? The most immediate impact of Jonathan Mosley's disbarment may be in the upcoming trial of 11 Oath Keepers facing charges of seditious conspiracy for their role in the Capitol breach. A Virginia state court has disbarred Jonathan Mosley, an attorney who has represented a slew of high-profile January 6 defendants, including a member of the Oath Keepers charged with seditious conspiracy, as well as several targets of the House Select Committee investigating the attack on the Capitol. Most prominent among Mosley's criminal clients is Kelly Meggs, an Oath Keeper from Florida who took on a leadership role for the group that breached the Capitol. Mosley also previously represented Zachary Rehl, R-E-H-L, one of the Proud Boys leaders charged with conspiring to obstruct Congress on January 6th, though he withdrew from that case in December. On Friday, after a 2-day hearing in Prince William County Circuit Court, a 3-judge panel ordered Mosley's law license revoked, court records show. Details of the bar discipline case against Mosley were not immediately available, but a summary posted on the Virginia State Bar website on Tuesday said the court found that he violated professional rules that govern safekeeping property, meritorious claims and contentions, candor toward the tribunal, fairness to the opposing party and counsel, unauthorized practice of law, multi-jurisdictional practice of law, bar admission and disciplinary matters, and misconduct. The decision was effective April 1st. April Fools, it is true and you're disbarred. Mosley plans to fight the disbarment, I guess it goes on, and immediately filed an appeal. Reached by phone on Tuesday night and asked about the bar action, he was tight-lipped. Since it's on appeal and otherwise confidential, I'll have to wait on that. Thanks, Mosley said before hanging up. Mosley's trouble with the Virginia State Bar could imperil his ability to continue as attorney for Meggs and in an array of other January 6 litigation. Mosley is not a member of the District of Columbia Bar, but does belong to the bar of the federal court in D.C., handling those cases. Yeah, they actually have different bars. That's true. Membership in that bar is contingent, though, on bar membership in another state or locality. And he's lost his Virginia bar membership. I don't know whether he has another state admission or not. The most immediate impact of Mosley's disbarment may be in the upcoming trial of 11 Oath Keepers facing charges of seditious conspiracy for their role in the Capitol breach, including Meggs. U.S. District Court Judge Amit Mehta has worked to keep the trial on track for July while scheduling 2 other Oath Keepers trials for later in the year. But Mosley's exit could complicate Meggs' ability to prepare a defense. Mosley has also represented several major witnesses facing subpoenas from the January 6th Select Committee, including Meggs, Oath Keepers leader Stuart One-Eye Rhodes, who was on the phone with Mosley when the FBI arrested him, and Stop the Steal founder Ali Alexander. Meggs and Alexander have both sued to block the Select Committee from obtaining their phone records. Ah, yes, that brings me back to Kevin McCarthy and his weird complaint yesterday during the contempt proceedings on the House floor, basically saying, we can't live under this tyranny where, and you wouldn't want to live under this tyranny where the government can come in and take your phone records and demand that they can rifle through all of your communications. And that's called, subpoenas and getting warrants, and I don't know what to tell you. But he was basically saying was that, you can't investigate me. That's actually worse than committing crimes. So please leave me out of this sort of thing. I don't know. It's just nonsense defense, but let me scroll back and see if I can find it. Ah, yes, right. Here is reporting from Billy House, congressional correspondent for Bloomberg News, quoting McCarthy on the floor. House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy takes to the floor regarding the contempt of Congress resolution against Scavino and Navarro, answering our earlier question, for allegedly not complying with the January 6th subpoena, saying, quote, is about criminalizing dissent, and two wrongs don't make a right. But when the dissent reaches seditious conspiracy levels, well, gee whiz. A crime was committed. He goes on to say, the riot on January 6th was wrong, but Democrats' reaction to trample Americans' civil rights is also wrong. Do we really want to live in a country where politicians can seize your phone records, compel your testimony, and ignore your rights because they disagree with your politics? Wow. Most Americans don't want to live in a country like that, said McCarthy. But that's I would say an unfair characterization of what's going on here. I'm being investigated simply because I, exercised my right to bear arms. Well, you do have the right to bear arms. The thing is, you shot 16 people. You're not being prosecuted because of your right to bear arms. You're being prosecuted for the assault and attempted murder of the 16 people you shot. That's, you know how it is when people are trying to spin things. But how about that? Two wrongs don't make a right. Well, what's the second wrong here exactly? They're investigating you. What it comes down to is he was saying committing crimes is wrong, sure, but investigating crimes is even worse. Two wrongs don't make a right. You got to let us go here. Yeah, well, that's not really likely to fly, but it is, and it's what he said, so now we have to, I'm just reporting it. Anyway, back to the Mosley disbarment. Where were we with this? Oh, right, yes, I was reminded of that because Meggs and Ali Alexander, have both sued to block the Select Committee from obtaining their phone records. Well, tough. Mosley is also listed as attorney for the Oath Keepers organization in a civil suit in which Democratic House members are seeking damages from former President Donald Trump, the Oath Keepers, and various people charged in the storming of the Capitol. Mosley's involvement in these cases was marked by his unusual and rambling legal filings, which drew the ire of judges like Mehta, who is presiding over the sprawling Oath Keepers conspiracy cases. For example, Mehta chastised Mosley in December for joining with another attorney to seek the release of two January 6th defendants who claimed they might be given COVID vaccine injections against their will. Mehta emphasized that there was no evidence to support their fantastic fears. Mosley has argued repeatedly that the people who wanted Trump to remain president wouldn't have stormed the Capitol to obstruct Congress because they needed lawmakers to remain in session to overturn the election. He also revealed the existence of a search warrant targeting a close friend of Rails who was also affiliated with the Proud Boys. Okay, who cares? When Mosley withdrew from Rails' case, he also issued head-scratching public filings describing his billing practices. I guess that's what got him in trouble, really. Mosley's professional website, which had touted his expertise handling a variety of criminal cases, child custody disputes, and debt collection, appears to have gone offline in recent weeks. Jonathan Mosley delivers the results you need at a price you can afford, the site previously said. Mosley graduated from the George Mason University School of Law and passed the bar in Virginia in 1997, according to the site. Well, that sucks for me because I graduated from the George Mason University School of Law and passed the bar in Virginia in 1999. So possible we overlapped, but I went at night where all the cool people did because I was working during the day, like actually making the laws in Congress while I was studying it at night. And by the way, they thought that actually absolutely sucked in the congressional office where I worked, and they couldn't wait to get rid of me. So, oh well. Anyway, look, George Mason University of Law, the School of Law, very right-leaning for sure. A law and economics program to begin with. And some of you may know that after I graduated, they waited for me to get out of there, but they renamed the school the Antonin Scalia School of Law, right? It's still George Mason University, but now they appended his name onto it. And who is our chancellor who signed our diplomas at graduation? Ed Meese. So, anyway, there you go. Mosley spent several years as a manager at the U.S. Department of Education, beginning in the Reagan administration, and later worked for the conservative legal organization Judicial Watch, his website said. Virginia bar records show he was suspended from legal practice for 6 months in 2009. So, spotty record, to be sure. Okay, thought you might enjoy that story. Time for us to start wrapping things up here. Yeah, and I think we will. I'll tell you what, I'll go back to the thing I teased at the end of yesterday's show and didn't get time enough to read, and perhaps now I'll get through it. Remember, I told you the TPM had reported, thanks to Christina Cabrera, that under the headline, "Oh, look, yet another former Trump official seems to have done a voter fraud." Let me give you the details on Matt Mowers. We got a little of this out yesterday. It's just a brief piece here. And remember, this is a former State Department official in the Trump administration, now running against Representative Chris Pappas as the GOP challenger. Cast ballots in two different states, in the 2016 GOP presidential primaries. Records obtained by the Associated Press reveal Mowers first voted in the new. I guess I did get a lot of this out yesterday, didn't I? Remember, first voted in New Hampshire primary via absentee ballot while he was working for Chris Christie's presidential campaign. Then that flopped, and Mowers re-registered with his parents' address to vote in his home state of New Jersey during their Republican primary 4 months later. And it is, in fact, against federal law to prohibit double voting like that. I wondered whether it would make a difference that it was in the primary or not, but I guess not. Christie had dropped out of the race at that point, so that's why he went and I presumably voted for Trump, because he then joined the Trump campaign in July before being brought to the new administration's State Department after the election. Like other pro-Trump Republicans running for office, Mowers, I don't know how he pronounces his name, has been trying to sow doubt about the legitimacy of U.S. elections by baselessly suggesting, if not loudly claiming, that elections are in danger of being corrupted by fraudsters. For example, his campaign lists election integrity, quote unquote, as a top issue on its website and calls for sham election audits and tighter voter ID laws. However, his own 2016 voting record is just another example of the hypocrisy of the broader Republican effort, revealing that the GOP's purported concerns over election integrity are little more than a cover to push voting restrictions and promote Trump's lie that the 2020 election was rigged. Another particularly damning revelation came last month when the New Yorker discovered that former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows registered to vote in the 2020 election with an address of a mobile home in Scaly Mountain, North Carolina, that he apparently never spent a night in. So, okay, now that is completely on the record, and we're almost completely out of time, but not entirely. There's still more. Let's see. Well, this is interesting. We'll squeeze this one in. Under the files of warfare in the modern era, warfare online, not keyboard wars, actual war, and how the online life can change things. A claim which I don't know if it can be verified or not. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, but tweeted by Ukraine_world. This story, I don't know, maybe it's real, maybe it's not. Sounds fun. A Ukrainian whose house was robbed by the occupiers near, Zotomir Highway, found his headphones in Belarus by geolocation. That's all there is to the story. I mean, there's no follow-up, but interesting possibility. And a map, screenshot of a map posted here. All of the town names being in Cyrillic lettering doesn't mean much to me, but I guess it's supposed to illustrate where the AirPods showed up. And I guess you can do that with those things, like tracking your iPhones. I just found that kind of fascinating. Not the sort of thing that was ever possible before. And, your house got looted by occupying troops. Totally believable. But what's interesting there, though, not only that they would have, I could see, troops rifling through a house and find some fun and expensive electronic equipment. The guy takes it. But, yeah, for them to turn up in Belarus is kind of interesting. Is that indicative of the possibility that it was Belarusian troops that did it, or is that where they're R&Ring their troops when they do get some rest, even though the other thing we discussed with Greg indicates that they're not getting much rest? Is that just, or what? I don't know. It implies a lot if the story is true, which we don't really know, but it's an interesting possibility. Another of the really amazing things that get claimed about that. I guess I'll close out with a more controversial observation, because I put away this tweet that just struck me as odd and weird. Mariupol's let's open it up here. Mariupol's City Council, according to Luke Johnson here, freelance journalist, used to be at the Huff Post. He says, Mariupol's City Council says Russian mobile crematoria have started operating in the city. Russians recruited locals to collect the dead bodies and burn them. And I just wanted to say that was the sort of thing that made me raise an eyebrow. Mobile crematoria. I don't know how feasible that really is. Makes me think of the mobile chemical weapons labs that actually weren't real, it turns out, in Iraq. And that struck me as one of those weird things that might be taking things a little bit too far. Bears some investigation. Don't know how reliable that is, and I'd hate to find out that they were really hyping stuff up that really wasn't true in order to propagandize against the war. If we start seeing that they're stealing incubators from neonatal intensive care units in Ukraine, another red flag, although quite honestly, that would be the perfect crime, because you'd accuse the Russians of it and they'd say, that's recycled Iraq propaganda.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, time now to start listening to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam in the morning. And, of course, what's coming up is his collection and view of what's happening here and abroad, around the world, everywhere in between. All the stories that we missed or didn't give enough nuance on comes next.